If you have seen any of my videos about how to learn languages, then you probably know that my 4 main pillars of my language learning philosophy are that we need to have fun when learning a language, we need to have enough contact with the language, we need to use effective methods, and we need to create a system. And from what I hear from people trying to follow these methods, I see that probably the most difficult part is keeping the system, right? Because in order to learn a language, we need to spend quite a lot of time with it. It doesn't just happen overnight or in a 1 or 2 weeks, because this is a long-term process that just requires some time. And whether you are learning your first language or you have learned 9, such as myself, the same thing applies here. We need to create a system to help us get over that long period until we get to fluency. Right? And in this video, I want to give you a few tips on how you can keep that system in place, how you can motivate yourself to keep learning every day, even if you don't always feel like learning, because it's normal. It happens to everyone. Sometimes we feel super excited about learning the language and we want to read books and watch series and talk to people and learn grammar. And then there are other days when we just don't feel like doing it, and that's when the system is really important, because if we have some habits and plan in place, then it's really easy to just follow it. My first tip is to learn at the same time every day, ideally in the morning. I myself am not much of a morning person, but whenever I am active in my language learning in a given period of time, I always make sure that I do it in the morning. One of the first things I do when I wake up, before I check my phone, check my emails, and just start my normal day. This is because we have most energy in the morning, and that also gives me a great feeling of achievement throughout the rest of the day, because I've already spent my half hour or 1 hour, ideally, with learning the language that I'm trying to learn. My tip number 2 is combine this language learning activity with another activity that you normally do throughout the day that doesn't require extra energy for you. You don't need to think about it because it's just something that you do normally. For example, combine it with your arrival home after your work day, right? You come home and you just spend 20 minutes, for example, going through your vocabulary in your gold list notebook or with your app or whatever method you prefer. For example, I myself like to combine language learning with preparing breakfast. This is I have a little ritual when I wake up in the morning and prepare my breakfast. Then I usually turn on my Bluetooth speaker that is connected to my phone, and I listen to the podcast in the language that I'm currently learning. Another great tip is to leave the materials which you are using for your language learning somewhere in a visible place where you can easily see them. For example, if you are reading a bilingual book, then put it on the bedside table next to your bed so that it's the first thing you see in the morning when you wake up. Sometimes I used to motivate myself by putting my phone inside the book so that I would have to wake up and open the book in order to stop the alarm clock. And I already had the book open in my hand, so I would read 1 or 2 pages from the book, and this will keep me going through the book in a very quick pace without any extra trouble. So again, we're trying to make the language learning as easy and accessible as possible. Another way to remind you to learn the language the way you want it to is to use proper reminders. Use your phone, your laptop, your calendar, or simple post-it notes to actually help you remember that you wanted to use the time to learn a language. For example, put a post-it note on your laptop, and whenever you close it, because you're going for a lunch break or you're finishing your work day, you are reminded to spend 10 minutes revising vocabulary using your Anki app or whatever vocabulary method you chose. It's also a good idea to remind yourself of preparing for example, a conversation lesson. If you have time Thursday evening to have a conversation, don't wait until Thursday evening to figure out who you're going to speak to and about what. Make sure you remind yourself to prepare that conversation, to schedule it, for example, by Tuesday. So on Tuesday, you actually get a reminder from your calendar saying, don't forget to schedule that conversation for Thursday. And that gives you enough time to find your conversation partner, to figure out the topic, to prepare for it. Tip number 5, find a language learning buddy, someone that you can share your language learning experience with, because otherwise it's a very solitary thing to learn by yourself. And if you don't have anyone to share it with, it's so much better to have someone, preferably a community of people who are excited about learning a language and who are interested to hear your own experience to help you with your struggles. This is what we are trying to do at Language Mentoring. We are trying to create a community for autodidacts, people who are learning languages by themselves, so that we can all share this experience together. My tip number 6 is track your language learning. It is so extremely useful and motivational. Today we like to track everything, right? We have smartwatches that tell us how many steps we've taken during the day. We track our sleep, we track the calories of the food we eat. We track everything. And the reason is that we put focus on the things that we measure. And that's why if you don't measure your language learning in any way, then you don't really know whether you have been doing fine or you are not really following your plan. That's why it's so important to actually have a plan in place and then measure how well you are keeping it. And that's why I recommend people to create a time plan, meaning how many minutes you are going to spend with each of the activities that you put into your plan, and then track how much time you actually spend doing these activities. It is really extremely motivational. We have seen it with thousands of people that we helped track their learning with, and they're always surprised to see how much time they actually spend with the language. They wouldn't believe it if they didn't see it on paper. My final tip for you in order to help you in your long-term learning is do not miss 2 days in a row. It's perfectly normal if you miss one day. It just happens to every one of us because, life happens. You have suddenly a different schedule than you were planning to have, and you don't have any time for that language learning. That's okay. But do not miss another day if that happens. So make sure that the next day, whatever happens, you will make sure you have time for the language learning activity that you were planning to do. This is extremely important for your psychology, because if you miss 2 days, then it is really, really difficult to get back on track. And then you usually just tell yourself, I missed 2 days already. I will take a break until the end of the week and then I'll start. And this usually doesn't happen. It's very, very difficult to get back on track if you miss several days. And that's why if you keep it a rule to always miss 1 day at the maximum, then you are safe. So these are my 7 tips to help you in your language learning. Don't forget that it's a long-term process. It does take some time, and that's why we need to make sure we help ourselves in this process with this habit creation. And I hope you use at least 1 or 2 of these tips. Let us know in the comments which tips are the best for you, or which tips you would add to help other people in their long-term language learning.